Welcome to the Inland Valley Storytellers Story Swap meeting. My name is John St. Clair, and we are meeting the second Tuesday of each month in a hybrid meeting now. So what you see behind me is the Claremont Forum, and we have three people here. Ooh, I just got dark. You know, I never turned on the lights.
I will.
Can you turn on the lights over there? It was weird because suddenly a train came by and suddenly I got dark when the train was. I need that one because my face is still quite dark. It's probably, hold on, let me go over here.
That whole row is out. 1, 2, 3 of them. Is there another light switch in here? Added more shelves.
Oh, this one. I accidentally turned on the fans. That's weird. We have a whole row off. Did you turn those off?
Click something.
Please. You can.
That turned those on, but still not that row.
Okay, that's gonna have to do.
It is better.
Can you see my face now? A little bit. Okay, it's a learning process here as we learn how to do this hybrid meeting, and it's a rushed process because we can't get in till 7:30.
Yeah.
Adrian's.
So I don't think we need to introduce ourselves because we all know each other. And I see Adrian has
just joined us.
Yeah, that's good. So Ron has volunteered to tell the first story. So I'm going to put him on spotlight for everyone. And Ron, you can go ahead with your story.
Thank you. It's the shorter part of a longer story. It's the first part of an endless story. It is said about the Vermont that I love that should you be able to iron it out flat and smooth, it would be larger than Texas and Alaska put together. It's so hilly and convoluted. But even more to the truth is the rock-bound coast of the state of Maine. It is quite convoluted. In fact, if you could pull it all straight, you'd be able to get to the moon and back and still have the state of Maine left over. There's just no doubt about it. But I rather like stories like that. One of the reasons that I like to read detective stories, particularly the British ones, is that you go on many side journeys and you have to read carefully and remember well. It's a good test for my memory, which is not as good as it once was, if it ever was as good as I'd like to think that it should be. For there's lots of side places to stop off and take a visit. And that's the kind of story that I have in mind about Willard's hardware store. It all happened, of course, in the beginning of a really rough day. It was the third Saturday in March, about as wet and woolly as it could be in Waldoboro, Maine. And people were in town early on that day, of course, to get their work done and then to go home and listen to the Sweet 16 radio broadcasts of the basketball and amuse themselves whatever way they go. But it's just a lousy day. It was not the end of winter. Worse, it was the beginning of the mud season. Last night's kind of drizzle, and that which was continuing today, they knew was not going to be the last, nor would it be probably the one that just sort of ended the last of the snow. There'd still be some more. So all of this was discouraging. Now, one of the things that made it all the more ornery is Sandy Willard. Of course, you know that he's fourth generation at Willard's hardware store. Well, his great-great-great-grandfather was not really a hardware monger. He was a smithy and a farrier. But as time went on, it became kind of the hardware store. And Sandy was an interesting fellow. You may also know he was the only one to finish college in his family. And that sort of gave him the right to think that he could give his father, who was the president of the corporation, it was just a family corporation, the hardware store, all of the benefit of his advice. And of course, his father didn't take to that well, but that didn't dissuade Sandy a bit from offering as much as he could, as often as he could. In fact, he really got to be a nag about it. Well, you put that and the bad weather and the fact that everybody had done their shopping early at the hardware store, and now there was nothing to do but just sort of try to neaten things up and listen to Sandy go on and on and on. So finally, though seniors should have their privilege, Sandy's father finally relented and said, all right, I guess that's okay. Go ahead and experiment if you want to. Now, the idea that Sandy had was an interesting one. And I guess the reason that he felt that it was so important is because, well, I guess that's kind of the priority that you get when you almost pass the only course that you take in business administration. And he thought that there should be some important improvements made overall in the business. And finally, when his father relented, and that left Sandy to get right to it. And he did. In fact, he'd been hoping for this for some time and laying back the arrangements for all of this. And the first thing he did was to let his father tend to the business of the store. Again, no customers there, inventory, whatever it is. Sandy went off by himself to the front of the store. The front of the store, right on Main Street, of course, you know it very well. A big plate glass window in front. The first thing that Sandy did was to close the drapes on the window. Still Saturday afternoon, mind you, early afternoon. People might come by and see what's there, but he closed the drapes. The drapes were there because his great-great-grandfather had installed them when the building was constructed to replace the old smithy and farrier shop that he had on that same site. The idea was that at closing time on Saturday, the drapes should be closed because there should be just no thought of commercial enterprise on the Lord's day. And then they'd open them up early on the Monday morning. And so that's how they managed all that. So the drapes were there. Sandy closed them. Now, behind the drapes, he started to remove many of the things that were there in the window. And that was quite a task because there was a lot of stuff there in the window. You see, Sandy's grandfather could never distinguish between the notion of what is storage and what is display. And he thought if you could just sort of store things in a place where you could display, then if somebody asked for something that you didn't have on the counter, they could always say, well, we'll look and see where that might be. And we could look under something in the display area, which of course was in the front window. And if you happen by and see something that, everybody wins. Well, it was crowded. I mean, it was a jumble of things, of old lawnmowers and sewing machines and pails and some garden tools and some kitchen items. I mean, just one thing piled on another. So that took Sandy quite a while to put them all in the back of the store where the storage room was, which because most things were stored in the front window was pretty well empty. And so he had a lot of space to take all that stuff back, and he did. Took him most of the afternoon. When he got it all cleaned out, then what he did was get a pail of water and some soap, and he washed all of that great big plate glass window. And that had not been washed for some time. So now you could, there was something that you could not only see it, but you could see through it, and that was a good thing. Close the curtain back again. Now there he was in an empty area, and he had already commandeered some latex paint from the hardware store itself and a brush. And he began to paint the floor and the backdrop to all of this. And that took almost the rest of the afternoon. But he rushed through the job, and he did get it done. And of course, it was going to take a while to dry. So what he did was to go over to Sealy, which is about, well, on a good day, about a 45, 50-minute drive. This wasn't a good day, so it took more than an hour and more than an hour to get back. But he went over there to the Once Upon a Time Nearly New shop, where he had something that he had seen some months before and put a deposit on it in the hope that they might keep it for him, and they did. And now he rang up and said he would come by and collect it and paid for it and brought it back in the truck and came back to the hardware store. Now it was past closing time, and he was there all by himself. But still, he left the curtain closed so that he could work as he wanted to. Floor was almost dry now. Tried to clean things up, neaten up a little more, and he installed what he had brought from Sealy, from the Once Upon a Time Nearly New shop. And it was really quite a surprise. He set it all up, then put a little sign in the side of the display so that people looking from the outside in, finding, first of all, they'd be quite shocked that things were not the jumble that they used to be, and seeing something very strange that they usually didn't see, and wanting some affirmation as to what it was they did see. So we had the sign to explain all of this. And it was really quite remarkable. But it was a long day. Went home, went to bed. Got up early next morning. Paint was very well dry. Things were fine. Made some adjustments on the items that he had brought to replace the things that he had taken out. Set it all. Sign was in place. But still, he couldn't open up the curtain until the end of the day. So we waited. It was a good day for him to think about how clever he was. End of the day, opened the curtains and left. So first thing on Monday morning, and things start early at Waldeboro, Maine on a Monday, people came by and were just astonished to find what was in the hardware store window. It, or more to the point, she was a full-scale mannequin dressed in a vintage, used at least once, wedding dress. And that was the only thing in the window. Hardware store, window, mannequin, wedding dress. Sign down below explained everything that you've already figured out. This was so that coming on the wedding season in June, there'd be plenty of time for brides to register their wishes at the hardware store. It was a terrific idea, although Sandy's father thought it was just downright foolish. Well, by noontime that day, everybody had at least heard about what was in the Willard's hardware store window. And by 5 o'clock that afternoon, darn near everybody'd come to see it. And they would tut-tut and, screw up their beards and scratch their heads. And sure enough, there it was. And everybody was commenting about it. Some liked it, some didn't, but everybody had something to say about it. And there it was. Now, because you can see that in your mind's eye so clearly, I should tell you something that you perhaps already know, and that is that it was such a surprise and a delight to Sandy to realize that by the end of the week, 4 families had registered for their wedding at the hardware store. Not one, two, three, four of them. Well, that just shocked his father, to be sure, but delighted Sandy. And it was amazing, including a rather surprise entry of Martha Lockwood and Billy Wisniewski, whom people didn't realize were going to be married. In fact, Billy had some ideas about it too. As a matter of fact, he had recently become very patriotic and was thinking that he would run off and join the Navy. But Martha's father and her two older brothers, all of whom are rather athletic, had a good sit-down talk with Billy and tried to make it very clear to him the importance of being a good husband and a good father. And so, it kind of worked out that way. But then when Billy found out that they had to register at the hardware store, he was delighted and changed his mind about the whole thing. Actually, he'd always wanted a nail gun from the time he was 7 years old. So that was just glorious for him. Now, you probably know that Smith Gardner and Margaret Wilson tend to have lunch together every Thursday over at Moody's Diner over on the Post Road, not very far away. Welma's pies were, of course, just prized by everybody. And Jacob's things that he could do to make a sandwich. I mean, just the wildest combination of things, but just always beautiful to eat. And people enjoyed being over there. Well, Smith, as you may know, just loved to eat pie. And so that's why they enjoyed themselves there, especially on the Thursday. Margaret, I think you do know already, is a Vietnam widow. Her late husband, Charlie, was a wonderful part of the community, and sadly he died. And small farm that they had operated together, and when things went bad to worse, they had 3 children. And so she taught grade school and taught everybody's a child there at grade school until her retirement. Smith, on the other hand, had been a dairyman, never married. I mean, when you milk by hand 38 Guernseys twice a day, I mean, it doesn't leave you time for much else to do. But now that he was a little bit arthritic and he'd sold the farm, at least he'd sold the cows, he kept the buildings, he had other things in mind. And after he finished his pie, he said to Margaret, "Would you like to take a look at the hardware store window?" "That would be very nice, Smith," she said. And so they paid their bill and piled into his always immaculate pickup truck and drove the few miles into town. And as well, luck would have it, there was a parking place right there on Main Street, right in front of the hardware store. They pulled up there and kind of both looked out the window and into the larger window, but didn't say a word. Finally, Smith kind of cleared his throat and said, "It's always been a wonder to me as to why people make such a fuss about weddings." And Margaret kind of cleared her throat and rather sheepishly nodded her head in agreement. "Yes," she said. Now, I'm not sure, but I think that was the first time that marriage had ever been discussed between the two of them. And how that adventure continues, I'm just not about to tell you, because it takes about 35 more minutes. And you don't have that kind of time. And it takes too many convolutions to get there. But if sometime in the future you'd like to know how it did work out, if at all it did, I'd be happy to tell you. But for tonight, I wish you well, and I so want to hear what Nick and Adrian and Barbara and John and whoever else is there have to say. And I'll just keep Smith and Margaret in mind while you do.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was great.
Thank you, Ron. That was a great story. So we now have 4 people here in the forum, and we have 3 people on Zoom. Making
I see Ron is there. Yeah,
Ron is there.
Yeah. I just arrived moments ago.
Ron number 1.
So who would like to tell the next story?
Well, I can now that I'm actually here.
Yeah. Well, we're set up for watching Zoom, so it
Yes,
makes sense to have
I
another.
actually really had intended to come out there, but one of the other organizations that I'm in had a semi-emergency Zoom meeting called. So even though it stopped raining, I had to be here for the other Zoom meeting. Now, this is one that I told a long time ago at one of the celebrations, but I was reminded of it by last night's college championship football game, in which the Georgia team, for the second time, won the national championship after a 40-year drought in winning that. And that reminded me of long football losing streaks, and also the legend of Prometheus. Because you see, you have to understand that people remember only half of the story of Prometheus. And that is that he was punished by Zeus for giving fire to mankind. But we don't learn in that version of the story why that was such a big deal, or what the other half of his gift to mankind was. For you see, Prometheus had been given a task by the gods, and in fact, he was the one who did the design work on half of humanity, because he was the one who did the design work on what we call women. And so the gift of fire, though, why would he violate the rules of the gods and give mankind fire? And the fact was that the story doesn't say, but I realized what it must be. Because when you have no fire, what you have is both awe and fear. When you look up at the night sky, what you see are the gods looking back at you. And when you have fire to light up your environment, those eyes looking down are somewhat dimmed, but also fire is the first thing that mankind possessed that he could watch making changes. The point of a stick becomes hardened by fire and becomes a better spear. The heat from a fire can cook things and change foods. Fire can be used to burn weeds away and make ground someplace you can plant something. Fire was something to make man think of his own ways of changing things, his own ways of developing things, rather than depending on the will of the gods. And that is why the gods did not want man to be given fire. Now, you're probably still wondering what that has to do with football. And that is what I need to explain to you. You see, when I was a student at Caltech, Caltech's football team was legendary for perhaps the wrong things. In fact, my second year there, the football team was in the midst of a 4-year losing streak. Now, because I had grown up in San Diego and gone to high school there, a number of my classmates had gone to the University of California at San Diego, which was the UC campus that was close to there. And so I was greatly pleased to learn that the Caltech football team would be hosting the UC San Diego football team for a football game. It was the equivalent of the Caltech homecoming game. And well, You see, for years, Caltech had football games in the wrong place. They would have evening football games at the Rose Bowl Stadium, which was really only a couple of miles away, but with such tiny crowds that even with the visiting team's crowds, it was wrong, because a seating capacity of over 90,000 might be filled with 900. And that just wasn't a good place. But Caltech actually had its own football facility at the same place where the Rose games were originally held, called Tournament Park, which is actually part of the Caltech campus nowadays. And so there was a nice little football stadium there, not a big capacity, capable of holding the Caltech students who wanted to watch the game and the visiting students from other places. And this day, they drove up from University of California at San Diego for a game. And what a game it was, because the Caltech football team had decided no more losses. They were going to win this one. It had been a good 40 years since they'd beaten the University of California team. And the former coach at the Caltech football team had been a former UCLA coach who had retired to go to Caltech for less pressure. This was a game of the century for the Caltech team. Everything was just going marvelously, back and forth and back and forth. The Caltech quarterback was actually quite good. It's just that there wasn't much of a team to go with him, but the team was playing, and the deciding touchdown was scored by Brennan. Now you have to understand that Brennan was an engineering student, and he was big, and he was strong, and he was a fellow who liked to party a bit. And that combination was why they had stopped having the campus election rallies in a building that had balconies because of something dangerous that he had attempted to do while somewhat intoxicated and difficult to stop. But on this day, he was fully sober and unstoppable. On the deciding touchdown, he carried 3 defensive men across the end line into the end zone to score that touchdown. And so it was that Caltech won that game by 3 points. I got to gloat a little bit because some of the cheerleaders for UC San Diego were people I'd gone to school with. But that's when the real planning began, because you see, at Caltech, there was a tradition. On those rare occasions when there was a football victory, there had to be a bonfire. And because this was a bonfire that was celebrating the end of a 4-year football drought, it was going to have to be a special bonfire. Now, you have to understand that the fire department of Pasadena was always notified by the athletic director when this type of thing happened, because they would come out with an antique fire truck and put out the bonfire, because the bonfire would typically be in the middle of California Boulevard between the bulk of the campus and where the athletic fields were. And that's why it couldn't be there. There had to be something bigger, something better, something more colossal. And so the plans began. Now, if you've never read about the things that Caltech students have tended to do in the past, you have to realize that at this point in time, the student house that I was associated with, well, need to explain the student houses. The student houses at Caltech are kind of like the ones in the Harry Potter stories, only without the British accents for the most part. But they're based on a European style of thing that are not really a dormitory, they are a social unit. And the one that I was involved with, Page House, the running joke at that point was that it called itself the Page House White Horse and Railroad Company, because the family symbol of the Page family had a white horse rampant, And the people in Page House built things and made things that drove the campus authorities and the Pasadena authorities just a slight bit crazy. To give you an idea, at one point, they built a driveway over the course of a weekend. In another case, they installed a lawn from turf that would have gone bad. And things like this, without any authority, of course, they just did these things. And so the people in Page House were to design a bonfire. Now, this was to be no ordinary bonfire, but I was not part of the planning process because one of the others pulled me aside. One of the other students was from a family that produced TV travel logs, and they were shown on one of the local Los Angeles television stations. And he said, I'm going to borrow one of my dad's camera sets, and I need you to run the light bar. And of course, he had to teach me how to operate the light bar. And that's because we were going to be filming the bonfire and the crowd at night. Oh, this was going to be great. Professional camera and lighting equipment. Well, the athletic director had told the fire department, the students are being really sneaky, so they'll probably put out a decoy bonfire first to guide you away so that they can be around the real bonfire for longer. But we think the real bonfire is going to be on California Boulevard. And so it was that night. At the time for the bonfire to occur, everyone was in place, just not the places that the athletic department or the fire department thought. On Hill Avenue near Pasadena City College, in the middle of an intersection there, a small bonfire appeared. And the fire department said, oh, that's cute. That's the decoy bonfire. And they went with their little antique fire department truck, which really was very old, but still functional, and put out the little bonfire. And they said, all right, well, so we must be getting time for the real bonfire on California Boulevard. So they went down Hill Avenue and turned right onto California Boulevard. And there in front of them, just igniting, was a bonfire in the middle of the street. And no crowd. That's odd. Where? And then farther in the distance, at the intersection of Lake and California, there was what could be described as a kawoompa of flame shooting up into the air. Now, what had happened was that the students had borrowed some police barricades from convenient places where they happened to know they were stored and put them around the intersection of Lake and California to keep the intersection clear. And panel trucks and station wagons drove into the intersection, unloaded preset pallets, made them into a large square, departed the intersection in all four directions. An electric igniter was clicked, and that's what the kawoompa was, were the flames shooting up from the chemically treated wood on the pallets. The smaller bonfire in the middle of California Boulevard, in the middle of the campus, was just big enough so that the antique fire truck could not drive around that fire to get to the larger one. So they would either have to put that out and clear the debris away, or back up 2 blocks, go north on Hill Avenue, west on Del Mar, and south on Lake Avenue to get to the real bonfire. After, of course, putting out the small one, because they couldn't just leave that going. So that would give Caltech students a few minutes of marching around the intersection and around the bonfire with the other person and I filming it for the record. Now, the record itself was going to be involved later because the film was then rushed to one of the TV stations to develop and show for the 11 o'clock news. But the fire truck put out the fire, backed up, went north, west, and south and approached the real bonfire where there were hundreds of Caltech students marching around the intersection with the traffic lights saying, "We're number one, we're number one." And the film person and I were standing there filming this from, frankly, we were in the street, yes, but we weren't blocking traffic. And there was a hand on my shoulder. And I turned around and there was a police officer there. He said, "Get out of the street." I said, "Yes, officer, but we actually do have a press pass." And I flashed it. I did because I was actually on the staff of the newspaper there at Caltech. And he said, "Get out of the street." And so we went up onto the curb and we continued filming from the sidewalk. And he couldn't come up with anything to keep us from filming from there. And he discovered he couldn't arrest anyone for jaywalking because they were going with the traffic light. And they didn't know who had placed this mysterious bonfire in the middle of the intersection. Well, that was when the fire truck began to unload the wherewithal to put out the fire. I did mention Brennan. And he was not part of the planning of the bonfire. He had been celebrating his winning touchdown for several hours since then. And his capacity was enormous to go along with his physique. And frankly, he had consumed quite a bit of alcohol by then. And what he saw was the antique fire truck there and the firemen unreeling the hose to put out the nice fire that he was enjoying so much. And so he thought, I don't want them to put out the fire yet. And so he ran up to the fire truck, lifted the two-man fire hose reel off the fire truck, and started to go north on Lake Avenue with this. The firemen who were trying to work with this stared because that was really heavy. And he had just lifted it off of the truck and gone north as if that were not a problem. Well, the same police officer saw this and was stunned and ran up Lake Avenue and caught up with Brennan and said, "Stop or well, the obvious thing was stop or I'll shoot," but he couldn't really do that for fire hose theft. But he got Brennan's attention and he said, "Put that down." Well, Brennan tried to hand him the fire hose and he said, no, put it down." All right. So Brennan put down the fire hose and the fireman rolled it back to the fire, eventually hooked it back up to the fire truck and slowly put out the fire. But you see, as the people were marching around the fire was so bright that it was brighter than the street lights, brighter than the store lights, so bright that it dimmed the night sky, so bright that it outshone the stars that normally shine down, so bright that it inspired the minds of people there to think of other ways to change things. Now, did that inspire other things to happen later of a scientific nature? I will say that one of the other people there on the site, when he graduated from Caltech with a degree in physics and English, a double major, went on to become a professional photographer who developed low light photography that got him a substantial amount of money from Kodak and the cover of a National Geographic magazine. There were people there who worked in a lot of other areas. One of the fellows there became the guy who designed fonts for this new company called Microsoft. He became the vice president of Microsoft, in charge of their font department, in fact. One of the others was a musician who ended up working for this company called Moog that was doing synthesizer work. Were any of these inspired by that fire? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that even as he was still being punished for his great violation of the rules of the gods, looking down from eternity, I think that Prometheus laughed and laughed and laughed. And so, fire, football, yeah, they go together.
All right. Thank you, Nick. All right.
We
Well,
lost Ron.
no,
He's here.
I'm here. I exist. Perhaps maybe.
you
No,
see-
no, the other one.
Oh, yeah, he said he couldn't stay long.
Ah,
And that's why he wanted to tell the first story.
sure. Well, my original plan was to be out there in Claremont tonight, but as it turned out, the other meeting I had to be at ended about 2 minutes before I got to this one.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're able to join with Zoom,
Yes,
which is why we're having the hybrid meetings.
yes.
I was hoping Penny Post might join us, but with the later start time, that really makes it hard for her on the East Coast.
Yeah. I got an email from her. She was trying to talk me into doing something for one of the groups that she's with for a Zoom thing, but I don't think I can do what they wanted.
Okay.
But she's been involved with the offshoot of storytelling involving the healing stories and stuff.
Right, right.
So she's been heavily involved with that recently.
That's good. Well, who would like to tell the next story?
Well, I have a short little thing. I forget what I was looking at online, listening to something, and someone said a line from a poem that I memorized in 4th grade. and I thought, oh my gosh, I have never heard anyone ever talk about this poem. And it was a collection of children's stories and poems and such. And this is written by Arthur Guterman, or maybe it's Guiterman. And it was first published in the Ladies' Home Companion. It was kind of like a magazine journal kind of thing in 1906. And I just thought, this is such a fun poem that I just had to tell you about it. So it's called Strictly Germ Proof. The antiseptic baby and the prophylactic pup were playing in the garden when the bunny gambled up. They looked upon the creature with loathing undisguised. It wasn't disinfected and it wasn't sterilized. They said it was microbe or at a hotbed of disease. They steamed it in a vapor of 1,000-odd degrees. They froze it in a freezer that was cold as banished hope and washed it in permanganate with carbonated soap. In sulfurated hydrogen, they steeped its wiggly ears. They trimmed its frisky whiskers with a pair of hard-boiled shears. They donned their rubber mittens and they took it by the hand and elected it a member of the fumigated band. There's not a micrococcus in the garden where they play. They bathe in pure iodoform 12 times a day, and each imbibes his rations from a hygienic cup, the bunny and the baby and the seeing that poem and having to recite it. And it's, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I knew it was kind of funny, but anyway.
Okay, so everybody that's doing Zoom has told a story. Now it's time for us live people.
Ah,
Do you have
Yeah.
one, Ron?
well, I didn't stop to make a direct plan, but that and Ron Evans's story brought two very short stories to mind.
So do you want to stand and we'll turn the chair around and
Sure.
make sure we have it situated so you let's see here, we'll put you on spotlight.
Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Apple's Owl was his name. He grew apples on the land that had been his great grandfather's, and his apples were superior. And he was always experimenting with new breeds and new ways to grow apples. He lived in our farmhouse that had been his family for many generations. He lived all alone. He rarely spoke to people. Mostly, if he did, he talked about apples. But he always came to church on Sunday morning, always paid attention, always thanked the preacher. And so his life went on. His greatest challenge, though, was trying to grow a silver leaf apple. Now, they're yellow apples and terribly persnickety to grow. And in the fall, their leaves, instead of turning brown, turn a silvery color from which they get their name. And he worked on that tree and worked on that tree and talked about that tree until people were mighty tired of hearing about silvery apples. Now, the schoolmarm taught the children and sat in the same pew with her husband, one seat ahead of him, for years and years. And then one day, her husband didn't wake up in the morning. Nobody thought much of it. These things happen, particularly of people in that age group. And I thought, but they were very surprised when 2 Sundays later, Apple's owl moved forward 1 pew and sat down next to Claremont. They didn't seem to speak. They certainly didn't touch. But after that, week after week, they sat next to each other in church. And then one Sunday, some months later, they went out to lunch after church at the local restaurant. A few more weeks went by, and it was obvious that they were becoming a couple. Finally, he asked her to marry him and move out to the ranch with him. And she said yes. It was a simple wedding, for they were simple people, but everyone was rejoicing that 2 lonely people had found themselves. On their wedding night, Apple's Owl made one pronouncement. I don't care what else you serve, but I have apples, one way or another, with every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and always have. Well, Clara was a pretty good cook. And she came up with different ways to include the apples from the farm. And they always had apples. Years went by. One morning, Apple's owl went out to see his silver apple tree. For the first time in years, it appeared to be budding. For that year, other trees weren't doing well, but that one tree seemed to be doing better. So he put as much energy he could into it every day, and he watched and watched and watched and watched and waited for the apples to finally get ripe. And as the leaves were turning silver, the apples turned yellow. And finally, he decided that those at the top of the tree looked like they're ready to pick. And instead of getting a ladder, he climbed up into his apple tree, picked a shirt pockets full of apples, and fell backwards and died. It was a cold, cold day, and it was some time before Clara realized something had gone wrong. She got him inside, thinking maybe she could do something for him. We got him warmer, but he was gone. And as she was wondering what to do next at this particular moment, northeastern blew in. Hey, they knew it was coming, but it was a powerful storm. A heavy snow fell. She looked out and she thought, well, we really can't do much of anything today. But as soon as it blew by, she said, well, we got to tell people that Apple's owl is gone. And she went in town and told people, and they came out and they decided this is not weather or time to bury him. So what they did is they packed him up in an apple crate and put him down in the root cellar where many years worth of different apples were stored. Clara hired some help and kept the crop going and watched that silver apple tree. And hey, they did get some apples from it that year, but not the next, or the next, or the next. And the price of apples kept dropping. And apple farms in their part of the country were dropping out and stopping producing. But still, she did the best she could until her time. Hey, was coming close to an end. And one night as she was dreaming, a apple's owl came to her. He looked at her and said, apples. Apples. He said it over and over and over again until finally she followed the strange apparition down to the basement, and he went up to a box that should have been full of apples and was filled with Apple's owl. They had buried Crate. Not Apple's owl. She sat through the night next to her beloved owl, went into town the next day, got a crew out, and they buried him right under that silver apple tree that had been his death. And just a few days later, Sarah passed on. Wasn't nobody interested in taking over that ramshackle farmhouse or those tired old trees? And the forest began to grow back into the land. But if ever you're in that part of the country, you might find the remnants of an old apple orchard in amongst the pine trees and birch. And there's one, just one, that after all these years always bears beautiful yellow fruit. And their love, Claire, get under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home.
All right, great. Thanks, thank you. That was great.
What, the other story?
Sure.
I heard the wild geese flying in the dark of night. With beat of wing and honking, I heard them on their northward flight. And in my heart there grew a longing to follow. Elizabeth was quite a student. She was top in her county in one thing after another, and an accomplished young artist. It was her dream to go to the university as soon as she graduated from high school. And she had all the skills. She was certain she would do well. But Black Friday hit, and suddenly prices dropped. And her father said to her, I'm sorry, Ellie, We just can't send you to school. It's not possible. It became obvious that the single ranch that they were on, the land that they were on, wasn't going to work for them very well. And her childhood friend, 2 years older than herself, came over and said, why don't we combine our efforts and will you marry me? Yeah. It was perhaps not a marriage of love, but it was certainly one that would work for the two families involved. And it did, more or less. Elizabeth worked hard, had children, and developed her art skills. Her watercolors gained her ever more fame. In fact, they're hanging in great museums around our country as we speak. But as she grew older, she often thought about those early days when her dreams were different. It was Thanksgiving, and she had made her pies as always. And then before she put them in the oven, she picked up a sharp knife and she quickly drew a flock of geese flying on the pie crust. Her namesake granddaughter said, why do you do that on all the pies, Grandma? When I was young, I dreamed of following the wild geese on their flights north or south. I dreamed of being in great places. None of those things ever happened. It has not been a bad one. Your grandfather is a good man, and I had the children to plan for. But we really just didn't have very many choices right then. I was just like you, a top student, full of life, full of dreams. But I just didn't have any choices at that moment. People just didn't. But you, John, you shall have choices. I heard the wild geese flying in the dark of the night, with beat of wing unhonking. I heard the wild geese flying, and I longed to follow.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ron. You will be next. Take your share with you.
I think so.
Oops. I need to remove spotlight. And, well, actually, shouldn't have done that. Okay, now, can I do it? Sorry about that. Got a glitch here.
What you doing?
Yeah.
What's he doing?
I guess this will work. Okay.
My name is Barbara Rougeley, and I've come to share a story with you. The story comes from France. It's called The Nanny Goat and Her Two Little Kids. There once was a nanny goat. Whenever she left the house, she always said to her kids, don't open the door for anyone except me. And they never did. And then when she left, she'd say, when I come back, I'm going to sing. I'm going to rap 3 times. Do, do, do. And I'm going to sing this song. Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. And then I'll put my little paw through the kitty cat door so you know it's me. And I'll say, jump up now as if the straw is tickling your little bottoms. Your mother's home. Oh, the kids would open up the door and, oh, it was so good to be with mother again. Well, one day, the nanny goat left the house, and over her shoulder, she said, don't open the door for anyone except me. When I come back, I'll sing my little song. Little he goat, little she goat, Open the door, it's your mother. And then she left. The kids heard her message, but so did someone else in the forest. There was a wolf. Ha 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 ha, these will be good for me. And he went straight to the door and he said it in his best wolf voice. Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. And the kids went to the door and said, you don't sound like my mother. You sound like the wolf. Go away, go away, go away. The wolf went away, but he did not stay away. They want me to sound like their mother. I can practice. And he began to practice. Little he goat, little she goat. Little he goat, little she goat. Little he goat, little she goat, till he got it just perfect. Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. And then he went to the door and he rapped. How many times? 3 times. And he sang the song. Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. The kids ran to the door and said, oh, mother, are you back so soon? Wait, the wolf's been trying to trick us. Stick your leg through the door so we know it's really you. Through the little kitty cat door, the wolf stuck his dirty little scruffy paw. You're not our mother. Our mother has a clean, smooth, white leg. You're the wolf. Go away, go away, go away. So he went away, but he did not stay away. They want a little white leg, I'll give them a little white leg. Put his paw inside the flower tin. He got it all white smooth. Went back to the door. How many times did he knock? 3 times. What did he sing? Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. And the kids ran to the door and said, the wolf's been trying to trick us. Stick your leg through the door so we know it's you. He stuck his white leg through the door and they said, oh, mother, it's you. And they opened up the door and they said, oh, it's the wolf. Yes, it is the wolf and I'm hungry. What do you have to eat? Oh, cakes. Mom baked cakes this morning. Do you like cakes? I like cakes. And after I have the cakes, I will have you too. Where are your cakes? They're in the cookie tin right over there. That old wolf went over. Got so interested in those cookies. Yum, 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 yum. He put his head all the way in the cookie tin. One of the little kids came over and closed the lid. Num, 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 num. Finally, home came the nanny goat. She knocked how many times? What'd she sing? Little he goat, little she goat, open the door, it's your mother. Oh, Mama, is it really you? She stuck in her paw. Jump up as if the straw is tickling your little bottoms. It's your mother. Open this door. Open the door and oh, it's so wonderful. It happened. Mommy back. And then finally one of them said, the wolf's been here. Ah, the wolf's been here. The wolf's still here. The other one's still here. Where? In the cookie tin. And one of them said, I closed the lid. Good thinking. Good thinking. Now go over and sit down on top of that cookie tin while I get busy at the stove. So the little kids went over and sat down on the cookie tin. And that wolf was still num, 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 num. And the nanny goat went over to the stove, put up a whole pot of boiling water, kept it all hot. And then the wolf was finished eating, wanted to get out. Let me out, let me out. Just a moment, I'm almost ready. She picked up that big pot over to the cookie tin and started pouring hot water inside all the crevices around that cookie tin. Oh, oh. Will you leave us alone? Yes. Oh. Will you go away and never come back? Yes. Okay, little ones, hop off of the cookie tin because he's gonna bolt out of here. Little kids got off the cookie tin. That wolf went out. He went so far. He went so far. They never saw him again. And that's the story of the nanny goat, two little kids. Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you for making it possible for us to do all this.
Okay, I have a story. And the name of this story is Those Three Wishes. No one ever called Melissa Alice nice. That just wasn't a word that was used to describe Melissa Alice. She was clever and witty. She was clever and cruel. Her mother noticed, and she always hoped that Melissa Alice would outgrow this cruelness. Didn't happen. Her father didn't seem to notice. He was quite happy that his pretty little girl was smart and pretty, and she always got good grades in school. There was nothing the matter. Well, way back in 8th grade, Melissa Alice was the one that labeled the new girl, the new shy girl, contagion. And she spread the rumor that anyone or anything that touched this new girl had to be inoculated or sterilized or avoided because she was contagious. Well, there was a strange thing about Melissa Alice. And that was when she got into high school, and by the way, high school was just a greater venue to practice her skills and coolness. But it was very surprising that even though no one trusted her, she was always included in everything, right in the middle of it. So if you happen to be watching from your house, this group of high school students walk by, and in the middle would be Melissa Alice being chatty and witty, you'd think, whoa, that's a born leader. But behind her back, the other students didn't call her Melissa Alice, they called her Melissa Malice. Now, she was a good student and got good grades. And the reason she did is because she would go to school very early in the morning before anyone else was there. And she had a place where she could study without any interruption. So one day, she was walking to school early in the morning and she almost stepped on a snail. Ew, gross, she said. Now, she did not want to accidentally step on the snail because she enjoyed killing things deliberately. And so she lifted up her foot and was about to stomp on the snail when, in true story fashion, the snail said, "Stop!" "What?" said Melissa Alice. "Stop. If you don't kill me, I will give you 3 wishes. Ah, what? Are you kidding me? That stuff doesn't happen. And the snail said, "Well, try it." So she thought, well, what she really would want to wish for first was like 1,000 more wishes. But she wanted to find out whether this actually would work at all. So her first wish was something that her father wouldn't let her do. Her father would not let her have pierced ears. And so she said, my first wish is that I will have nice gold studs in my ears. And poof, just like that, no pain. She suddenly had beautiful little gold studs in her ears. And she was delighted. And so then she said, my second wish is that I will have a brand new Ferrari that is all mine. And suddenly, right there at the curb, next to the sidewalk she was on, was this beautiful red Ferrari. And she sat down and there were the keys. But she was a very careful girl. She looked in the glove compartment to make sure it was registered in her name and that she had car insurance in her name. And she did it. So before driving around in it, she got out and walked around the car and just admired how beautiful it was. Well, she got to the rear with the license plate and it had one of those custom license plate names. But it didn't say Melissa and it didn't say Alice. It said Malice. And she thought, oh, that stupid snail doesn't even know how to spell. So then she got into the car and she revved up the engine, because that's a powerful car, revved up the engine. And then just before taking off, she yelled over her shoulder, my third wish is that I will have 1,000 more wishes that will come true. And she took off. Well, she forgot all about school. She was having so much fun driving around in this brand new car. She forgot all about school and the fact that that day she was going to have a math test in first period. And that's why she was going to school early, was to study for that math test, because she hadn't prepared for it the night before. Well, finally, it suddenly dawned on her. Actually, what happened as she was driving, she had 1 minute of altruism enter her mind. And she thought, with 1,000 wishes, I could wish for world peace. I could wish that cancer would be cured. I could wish that all the ugly and old and poor people could suddenly be beautiful and young and rich. Well, when that minute passed, she thought, nah, I could wish that people that are young and beautiful and rich that I don't like will suddenly become ugly and poor and sickly and old. And then is when she had these negative thoughts in her mind, she remembered school. And so she quickly made a turn towards the school, parked in the parking lot, ran out of the car, and just slipped into her desk before the bell rang. And the boy sitting next to her leaned over and said, did you study for that math test that we're going to have this first period? And Melissa Alice thought, oh no, that stupid snail made me forget all about studying for the math test. I will fail that math test. I wish I was dead. And that's the story of those 3 wishes.
Oh,
Whoa.
Oh, wonderful.
Truly a story of be careful what you wish for.
Yep. Well, you have a story, Chris? Okay, I think everybody else that's here has told a story tonight. Very good.
thank you for making it happen.
Now, I want to
Yeah.
bring one thing that has been brought up. There is a Facebook page called Southern California Story Swap. I think it was started by True Thomas,
Probably.
and I'm a moderator on it, and so is Angela. I don't know, maybe you are too, Ron. I know you're a member of it. And I posted a message asking, is anybody thinking about hosting the Southern California Story Swap Festival? Because we haven't had it happen since COVID started. And I think Ron was the only one that responded.
I no longer have a group to sponsor it from.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so I was thinking about Well, I think you in your post, Ron, said, let's do it.
Yeah,
But it's a lot of work. And so there are two things that I'm thinking about. I would need support from other people to help do it. And the other thing, I mean, within our group, whether our group wants to take on that task. And the other thing is, will the other groups participate? You know, do they think it's time to resurrect that Story Swap Festival? And so far it's been crickets. Nobody else has responded. So I was thinking I could email the leaders of the groups that are still, you know, San Diego group is still quite active. South Coast group is still
we
going.
still exist.
Yeah. And the community storytellers exist.
I haven't heard from them in so long. Yeah.
They Karen Golden
Cool.
has been doing Zoom on one Sunday a month for community storytellers, and Long Beach is doing some stuff.
Yeah, at a coffee shop.
Yeah. So
Five groups might.
yeah, and perhaps I don't know whether the Black Storytellers of San Diego is still active or not, but they might be. So I could email those people, the leaders of those groups, and see, one, do they think it's time to resurrect the Southern California Story Swap Festival? And two, would they be interested in hosting? Or if we did, would they promote it within their own group? So
I vote yes.
you vote yes.
Both of the San Diego groups are active.
They are?
Yes. So that at least there are two down there, Black Storytellers and the Storytellers of San Diego are both doing things. So it's a question of whether they would come up for something up here. I think it's definitely time to contact the groups directly, because I don't think that Facebook group is working.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any response to my posts. Yeah, so I'll email them and see what I hear. And then report back next month.
So what are the steps that need to be taken?
So if we were going to host, the Claremont Friends meeting was a nice venue. That's where we've hosted twice before, and that worked out fine because they have that little kitchen thing for the lunch, and the worship area is the acoustics there are excellent, and it's a nice venue.
Have you talked to them about our using that space again, whether they have any new restrictions?
I have not. I would have to do that. So that's something I could do. I could contact them.
Because we'll want to know about that before doing a spring concert. If we don't do the story swapping festival, we still would want to do something.
Yeah. So I'll check into that and see whether that venue is available and what restrictions, if any, they have.
The other place might be Pilgrim Place.
Well, I know they have lots of restrictions there at Pilgrim Place. Yeah.
If it turns out we can't do it here, the South Coast group now meets at the church we were married in. I've got a key to it, but weekend days in spring are hard to come by at a church.
Yeah.
There are weddings almost every Saturday and Sunday from early March through late June.
Yep.
So we got the room once. I would need to get a yes and no answer and take it to the group, and then I'd have to take it to the church and say, yeah, we'll pay the same fee we paid last time when they held it at the last moment. We just happen to have an open Saturday, and try and make it happen that way.
What price?
At this moment, I can't remember. It was like, I don't think it was much. I think it was $100.
In the meeting, the Friends meeting?
I think it was 120.
And
I think it would be great. What's the time frame?
Well, it's usually in April or May. But I would think most weddings would be planned by now.
Yeah.
I mean, most people plan their weddings well in advance.
I mean, see what the Friends Meeting House says, see what they, okay, we'll meet next Thursday night. Thursday, and I can bring it up with whoever shows up. It's,
With the South Coast
the
group?
South Coast group, yeah.
Okay,
If Marty's there, we'll Zoom. She can set that up and make it work. If Marty's not there, we won't Zoom. I mean, people put comments, I do the Rockmore group, literally every third Thursday, in Texas, and there are always these beautiful chats that are mentioned, you know, with this chat. Oh, I thought this a chat. I have no way of getting them. Don't know how to find them, don't know how to print them, don't know how to use them. I'm terrible with Zoom.
okay. Anything, any announcements from you, Nick?
Nothing I can think of right now.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for participating,
Thank you for making it happen.
and I think I'll
I've got cookies.
stop the recording and close up the